Have you ever wondered what would happen if a whole country just vanished from the world map for a bit? Well, today, we're going to talk about how and why Japan did pretty much exactly that, closing its doors to almost everyone for over 200 years. Let's get into it.
Okay, so here's our game plan. First, we'll set the scene. Then, we'll dig into the 4 big fears that pushed Japan to make this huge decision. After that, we'll look at the super strict rules they put in place, what life was actually like, and finally, we'll weigh the pros and cons of being isolated for 2 whole centuries. All right, part 1, a country closed. To really get this, we've got to go way back in time, all the way to the early 1600s. And this really is the big question, right? I mean, just think about it for a second. Why would an entire nation decide to completely cut itself off from the rest of the world? It was a massive, massive decision, and you better believe they had some powerful reasons for it.
And listen, we're not talking about a quick break here. This policy was in place for over 200 years. That is an incredibly long time for a country to just be on its own. It's almost like Japan hit the pause button on its relationship with the entire planet.
So this policy actually has a name, Sakoku. It's a Japanese word, and it literally translates to closed country, which is, a perfect description. So anytime you hear the word Sakoku, just picture Japan shutting its doors.
So who was calling the shots? The group in charge was called the Tokugawa shogunate. You can think of them as the powerful military government that ran Japan during what's known as the Edo era. They were the ones who looked at the world and said, nope, we're closing up shop. And they made sure those doors stayed locked tight.
And that brings us to the most important question of all. Why? What was going on? The Tokugawa shogunate wasn't just trying to be difficult. Their decision came from some really big fears. Let's break down the 4 main things that were keeping them up at night.
Okay, fear number 1 was colonization. The leaders in Japan were looking around Asia and seeing European countries, like Spain and Portugal, taking over places like the Philippines. They started to get really nervous, thinking, hey, if we let too many of these foreigners in, what's to stop them from trying to take over our country too?
The second big fear was all about religion. Christian missionaries were having a lot of success in Japan, and a lot of Japanese people were converting. The shogun got worried. He thought, wait a minute, will these new Japanese Christians be more loyal to me, their ruler, or to a foreign leader like the Pope? It was seen as a huge threat to his power and to Japan's traditional beliefs like Buddhism and Shinto.
Fear number 3, it was all about the money. Japan had a lot of gold and silver, and foreign traders wanted it badly. The shogunate basically saw all of this incredible wealth just walking out the door. So they decided to slam that door shut to protect Japan's resources and keep them inside the country. And the last major fear was about keeping things peaceful and orderly at home. See, Japan had a very strict social structure back then. Everyone knew their place, from the samurai at the top to the farmers and merchants. The government worried that new ideas from the outside world could shake everything up and cause total chaos. Stability was the name of the game.
So with these 4 huge fears driving every decision, the government created some very, very strict new rules. Let's take a look at what the Sakoku policy actually meant in practice.
The rules were pretty simple, and they were absolutely ironclad. First, travel was a no-go. Almost all foreigners were banned from even setting foot in Japan. And, this is crazy, if a Japanese person left the country, they were forbidden from ever coming back. Second, they shut down almost all foreign trade. And third, they cut off all official relationships with other countries. No ambassadors, no treaties. Japan was officially flying solo.
So what was life really like inside this closed country? You might imagine Japan was in total darkness about the rest of the world, but there was one tiny, tiny little window that they left open. Let's see what that was. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Even with these super strict rules, there was an exception. While pretty much everyone else was banned, the government allowed 2 groups to keep trading, but under very tight control, the Dutch and the Chinese. And if you want to know just how tight that control was, look at this. It's an island called Dejima. It's a small, man-made island built in a bay. This was the only place those Dutch and Chinese traders were allowed to be. They couldn't go onto the mainland. This tiny island was Japan's one and only connection to the outside world, and it was designed to keep foreign influence contained. But even through this tiny crack in the door, some information still managed to get in. It was called Rangaku, which basically means Dutch learning. A small group of Japanese scholars were allowed to study books and talk to the traders on Dejima to learn about Western science and medicine.
So while Japan was isolated, it wasn't completely in the dark.
So let's fast forward. After more than 200 years of being closed off from the world, what was the result? In this last part, let's look at the good and the bad that came out of the Sakoku policy. Actually, here's a really clever way to remember all the key points. If you spell out Sakoku, it lines up perfectly. They shut the doors to stay safe, allowed limited trade, kept Christianity out, maintained order in society, studied knowledge carefully, and allowed a unique culture to grow. Pretty neat, huh?
When you boil it all down, Sakoku was a massive trade-off. On one hand, what did Japan gain? Well, centuries of peace and stability. They protected their resources, and a truly unique Japanese culture was able to develop without outside interference. But what did they miss? A lot. They completely missed the Industrial Revolution, huge scientific breakthroughs, and the chance to trade with the rest of the world.
And that's what I want to leave you with. This policy didn't just shape Japan's past. You can still see its impact today. So the big question to think about is this. What might be different about Japan today if it had never decided to close its doors all those years ago? Thanks for tuning in.